Conventionally speaking, history generally undertakes discussions on powerful rulers and kingdoms, how those kingdoms were established, how these kingdoms were administered, how these kingdoms then rose to glory, different pieces of architectures that were made, and how these kingdoms fell out of power and glory. So from a traditional perspective, these are some of the questions, or these are some of the discussions that history takes up. But we don't generally devote our discussions to the tribals, because the tribals have always been marginalized and downtrodden in the societies, which is why they do not feature as a part of the mainstream discourse. So in this lesson, we will devote this discussion to the tribals that have been present in the Indian society since ages ago. The tribals are not new. They are spread across different parts of the country even today. But they have their own origins, they have their own sets of history, cultural practices, their own religion, their own languages. So these are some of the ideas that we will be taking up in this discussion. So let us begin this adventure of finding out more about the tribals and how they lived in the past times. Firstly, to begin this discussion on tribals, we have to undertake a discussion on the Varna system. Now, historians consider the caste system as very unique to the Indian society. It is the caste system that can be considered the breeding ground of differences between the powerful and the powerless, between the rich and the poor. And in fact, this caste system further perpetuates these differences. These differences between the rich and the poor could be more starkly felt in today's world, given what's happening around. So it is the caste system that is the fountainhead of segregation or hierarchization of the Indian society. Now with this, you must be questioning who is at the helm of this caste system and who does these people get to wield their power on. It is the Brahman who is at the helm or the apex of this caste system. And who do the Brahmins exercise their power on? This now brings us to a discussion on the caste system at large. So let us now try to understand this caste system in greater detail and how this serves as a system of segregating the Indian society. The most important feature of this caste system is that it segregates the society in terms of occupations or professions. That is to say, people who belong to these different castes pursue different occupations, and in ancient and medieval times, these occupations were considered hereditary, which means that by the virtue of belonging to a certain caste, that person will be compelled to pursue the same profession. So this is the basis of the caste system. So let us now find out in detail the various professions that are pursued by the different caste members. At the top of this caste system feature the Brahmanas. The Brahmanas are traditionally the priests and scholars. They are the learned men and they come at the top of this caste system. Following the Brahmanas come the Kshatriyas. Now the Kshatriyas generally comprise the ruling class. So the rulers, administrators, warriors belong to the Kshatriya caste. And third on this list are the Vaishyas. Who are the Vaishyas? The artisans, tradesmen, farmers, merchants belong to the caste of the Vaishyas. So from this you can understand that people who pursued trade, people who engaged in commercial activities belonged to this caste. And the lowest caste in this four-part hierarchical structure of the society was the Shudras. Who were the Shudras? The manual laborers, peasants, people doing menial tasks were a part of the Shudra caste. So this four-tier structure of the society is the caste system. But outside this caste system existed people who were not incorporated into this caste system. Who were these people? They were considered the outcasts and the untouchables. Who were these outcasts and the untouchables? The street sweepers, latrine cleaners were considered untouchables. And given the menial task that they had to perform, they were not even a part of this caste system. So can you understand how the society is hierarchized on the basis of professions that people belonging to certain castes were supposed to pursue? The Brahmanas were at the apex of this caste system. Now, what privileges did the Brahmanas enjoy? In this caste system, they had the power to determine all the rules and restrictions pertaining to the society at large. So, it were the Brahmanas who prescribed those rules, those practices that were supposed to be taken care of or accounted for by the members of all these other castes. In a way, you can understand how this causes rifts among people who live in the same society. Because people who are Shudras would be treated in a very different kind of way than people who are Brahmanas. This is because they are at the top of the hierarchy and they are at the lowest rung of the hierarchy. And this hierarchization of the society is known as the caste system. Now let us talk about the people who did not want to belong to this caste system. In ways more than one, this caste system has been very oppressive. This is because members of just one caste get to enjoy their say, their final verdict on everything that pertains to the society as a whole. So you can understand how this rigid hierarchization of the society is very differential in nature. It is very discriminatory in nature. Which is why many groups of people did not want to belong to this caste system. Who were these people? These people were the tribal communities and the nomads who were not willing to accept and conform to the rules that were prescribed by the Brahmanas. So we have learned about the 4-tier structure that was the caste system, and it were the tribal communities and the nomads who did not want to belong to this 4-tier structure. With the expansion and growth of societies, different kinds of skilled workers were required. Because skilled workers were the ones who performed different kinds of works for the society. And for this reason, several smaller subcastes or jatis now came into being. Along with that, many tribes and social groups were also incorporated into the caste-based society, and they were given the status of jatis. So what do we learn from this? Here we get to learn about the subcastes who were called the jatis, and these jatis were a part of the Varna system itself. And many tribes and social groups that were also incorporated into this caste-based societies were given the status of jatis. Now around this time, it were the jatis rather than the Varna that became the basis of organizing societies. With this, a very important question that must be coming to your mind is that what were these jatis? So keep this in mind that the Varna system was a segregation of the society in terms of the occupations or the professions that people pursued. And on the other hand, the jatis were a birth unit in the Hindu society itself. Now within the Hindu society, there was in place this very rigid and inflexible Varna system that was based on the occupations. And there were only 4 Varnas or the 4 castes that we talked about. On the other hand, there were many jatis that were a part of the Varna system, and the jatis were not static in nature because there was mobility among the jatis. The jatis could rise up the scale, but it was not really easy to rise up the scale of the Varna or the caste system. And because of this reason, the jatis have now evolved into different positions in today's society. So around this time that we are focusing on in this lesson, it were the jatis rather than the Varna that became the basis of organizing the societies. Now let us talk about those people who did not want to belong this 4-tier caste-based society. They did not want to give up their autonomy by being a part of this caste system. And it is these marginalized and oppressed people that will be focused on in our lesson. The tribals are people who are there in our country even today. Now the tribals, with their rich cultural heritage, with their rich traditions, with their rich belief systems, enrich the country as a whole. And in fact, the Constitution of India lists over 700 tribes that are present in the country even today. Now earlier on, the tribals did not follow any social rules that were prescribed by the Brahmanas. So this is a point that we have been trying to establish for quite some time. The social rules and practices that were prescribed by the Brahmanas were very oppressive. Those were very discriminatory in nature. Marginalized and oppressed as the tribals already were, they did not want to lose their autonomy, which is why they wanted to exist outside and beyond the caste system, outside and beyond the dominance of the Brahmanas, which is why they tried to segregate themselves from the caste system and live outside or on the fringes of the societies. The study of history necessitates that we should question the sources. The sources of information play a very important role when we have to construct the histories of the past. Now, from where do we get to know about the tribals? Now, these tribals were people who did not keep any written records, which is why it is difficult for historians to construct the histories or the pasts of the tribals. In the absence of historical or written records, what do the historians rely upon in order to construct the histories of the tribals? Modern day historians rely upon the rich customs and oral traditions that were preserved by the tribals. Now, what are oral traditions? Oral traditions constitute a system of communication in which the rituals, the practices, the belief systems, the traditions, the histories are passed on to the next generation by oral means. Oral means that include folklores, that include myths, that includes ballads and chants. And through these ballads, chants and various other kinds of oral means, the histories of one generation is passed on to the next generation. And the tribals made sure to preserve their rich customs and the oral traditions. And it is these oral traditions that play a very crucial part to the modern historians who now try to understand and construct the history of the tribals. Before proceeding with this lesson and finding out more about the tribals and their lives, we should answer a question. The historians use oral traditions to construct the tribal pasts. Do you think this sentence is true or false? Well, this sentence is true because historians rely upon oral traditions to construct the histories of the tribals. In absence of written historical records, these oral traditions play a major role in providing us information on the tribals and their culture. We have learnt that the tribals lived outside the caste-based societies. Now, in the caste-based societies, people were segregated in terms of their professions, which implies that people from different rungs of the society, people pursuing different professional and occupational choices, lived in the caste-based societies. But what do you think these tribals did to earn their livelihood? Do you think these tribals had their own jobs and professions to earn livelihoods? Not so. These tribals instead were dependent on agriculture. And in fact, you should also keep in mind that many of these tribals were hunter-gatherers and herders. Now, who were hunter-gatherers? This hunting-gathering is a practice that could be found among the primitive men. And in fact, Many tribals resorted to this primitive practice of hunting gathering. The practice of hunting gathering means that these people ate whichever animal they could hunt, they ate whichever fruit or leaves they could gather. So in this way, many of these tribals were hunter-gatherers and herders. Now let us talk a little more about the lives of these tribals. Many of these tribals were also nomadic. What does this mean? This means that these tribals did not have a fixed settlement or house of their own. They moved from one place to another in search of food, in search of water. Now allow me to give you an example so that you can understand this better. You go to school every day and after attending all your classes, you come back home. Or whenever you go out on a trip, after a certain number of days, you have a house to come back to. Now, can you live outside your house for days and days on end? It will not be possible for you to live on the streets. And for this reason, we have houses where we live in. We have houses where we live in with our families. But these tribals who were nomadic did not have permanent houses where they lived with their families. Instead, they lived nomadic lives, which is to say, they roamed from one place to another in search of food, in search of water. They did not have a permanent shelter. Along with that, many of these tribes also lived in forests, hills, deserts, and other places that were difficult to reach. Now, do you have an answer to this? Why did these tribals live in places that were difficult to reach? This is because we have already talked about how the tribals wanted to segregate themselves from the mainstream societies. They did not want the mainstream caste-based societies to encroach upon their territories, which is why they lived in places which were very difficult to reach. By segregating themselves, by alienating themselves from the mainstream society, they were able to enjoy their autonomy. They were able to live peacefully in their own regions. So this explains why these tribals lived on the fringes of the societies. The primary interest and motivation that compelled the tribals to live away from the mainstream societies was the need to preserve their freedom, the need to preserve their independence. We have learned that these tribals were people who did not want to surrender to the oppressive caste system, which is why they wanted to maintain their autonomy, which is why they wanted to practice their own sets of belief. They wanted to hold on to their religion, to their cultural practices, and for this purpose they segregated themselves from the mainstream societies. So, in order to preserve their distinct cultures and live away from others' infringement, these tribals stayed away from the mainstream societies. So this can be considered the breeding ground of clashes and conflicts between the caste-based societies and the tribes, because the tribes wanted to retain their independence, they wanted to preserve their freedom, and on the other hand, these caste-based societies wanted to bring these tribes under their control so that they could dominate the tribals as well. So this is the reason why clashes and conflicts took place between these two groups of people. Now you'll be surprised to know that while on the one hand there were clashes and conflicts between the tribes and the caste-based societies, these two were mutually dependent as well. Doesn't this sound very contradictory to you? Because on the one hand they were engaged in fights and clashes, and on the other hand they were mutually dependent. How is it possible? Now try to understand this very clearly. The tribals lived mostly in the forested regions. So these tribals had access to the fruits and different other kinds of forest products. Now whenever people who lived in the caste-based societies required anything from the forests, they had to go to the tribals. Suppose a king is living somewhere and he requires some forest product. Will the king himself go to the forest to procure that product? Definitely not. For this reason, he will send his men to the forest, who will then get those products from the tribals. So in this way, people who lived in the mainstream societies were dependent on the tribals. Simultaneously, the tribals were also dependent on the people of the mainstream societies because they required grains to produce food. Now, it were the people of the mainstream societies, the mainstream caste-based societies, who pursued agriculture and produced food. Now, it were the people of the mainstream societies who pursued agriculture in a very proper manner, and they produced grains. And these grains were in turn required by the tribals for food. So you can understand how clashes and conflicts and mutual dependence both existed simultaneously. Now, this mutual dependence gave birth to an almost symbiotic relationship because one required the other for its own sustenance. The tribals were spread across different parts of the Indian subcontinent. Earlier on, we learned that these tribals wanted to maintain their independence. They wanted to maintain their autonomy, which is why they lived on the fringes of the society, secluded and away from the mainstream caste-based society. But by the 11th and 12th centuries, it were the Rajputs who were now gaining power, and it were the Rajputs who now formed their own clans and assumed the position of Kshatriyas. Now, who were these Rajputs? These Rajputs emerged as a very powerful clan of warriors and rulers. They were very brave and courageous. Now, can you tell me from where these Rajputs originated? The Rajput as a clan was not a homogeneous unit. This is because different lineages like the Hunas, the Chandelas, the Chalukyas, some of whom were tribes initially, went on to forming the Rajput clan. So can you understand that the Rajputs that we consider to be so powerful and mighty emerged from groups that were tribes initially? So this is a major change that took place by the 11th and the 12th centuries, because prior to this we saw this need for the preservation of independence and autonomy among the tribals. But around this time, different lineages like the Hunas, Chandelas and Chalukyas formed the Rajput clan, and after forming the Rajput clan, they now went on to assuming the Kshatriya caste. The Kshatriya caste was traditionally the caste of the rulers and the warriors. Do you recognize who is this and the role he played in the film from which this image is taken? You're right, this is Shahid Kapoor in the Hindi film called Padmavat. Now, why are we talking about Shahid Kapoor and the Hindi film of Padmavat here? This is because the Rajputs are people that we associate with grandness, with valor, with prowess, with elegance, and these qualities have been rightly attributed to and played by Shahid Kapoor in this film. So does this not come as a surprise to you? That the Rajputs, who are very mighty and powerful and are often considered to be of the purest of origins, began as tribes? Yes, because the Rajputs were constituted by various lineages and many of these were tribes. So you can understand that these tribes were not always secluded. These tribes were not always downtrodden and oppressed. They were powerful and valorous, and with their power, with their prowess, they went on to establishing their own clans and kingdoms, and one such example would be the Rajput clan. The Indian subcontinent has been witness to the rule of many very powerful rulers who belonged to the Rajput clan. And in fact, this continued rise and growth of the Rajput clans to the position of rulers now served as an example for various tribes. Because the point that we have been trying to establish all this while is that the Rajputs also initially began as tribes. Now when other tribes saw the success story of the Rajput rulers, they were also inspired. They also thought that with the right amount of courage and dedication and the right amount of determination could make them as powerful, as great rulers as the Rajputs. So the success stories of the Rajput rulers were seen as almost role models by so many tribes. And now we have to talk about the incorporation of the various tribes into the caste-based society. With the help of the Brahmanas, many tribes now became a part of the caste-based society. Now why do you think did the Brahmanas incorporate these tribes into the caste-based society? This is because the Brahmanas wanted to expand their control, and in order to be able to assert their dominance and their say over the tribals, the Brahmanas required to bring these tribals within the folds of the caste-based societies, which is why this incorporation took place. Now, do you think all these tribals could now join the higher castes when they were incorporated into the caste-based societies? Definitely not. This is because only the members of the leading tribal families could join the ruling class. And the people who did not belong to the leading tribal families could not join the ruling class. They were segregated as the Shudras. They had to belong to the lowest rung of the caste-based society or the lowest rung of the caste system at large. So we have talked about how the Rajput rulers have been inspirational to so many tribes, because these tribes now had in them the dream of establishing their own clans and kingdoms. And for this reason, the rise and growth of the Rajput rulers served as a kind of dream to them. Now few tribes among these which were directly following the lead of the Rajputs were the Ahoms and the Gonds. With this, we come to an end of a discussion on the tribals and the nomads as they existed outside the caste system. From this lesson, we got to learn about the Varna or the caste system and how this four-tier hierarchization of the society segregated people in terms of their professions. This four-tier structure of the society was also oppressive because it did not give space and autonomy to people who belonged to the lower castes. And for this reason, many groups of people did not want to belong to this caste system. They segregated themselves from this caste system and went on to leading isolated lives. These were the tribals and the nomads. Now, these tribals and the nomads, who initially were propelled by the need to maintain their independence and autonomy, were also incorporated into the caste system. The emergence of the Rajput clan that happened by the 11th and the 12th century, and as a point of surprise, we got to know that the Rajput clan initially started as few tribes. From this, we also learnt that various tribes were inspired by the success stories of the Rajput rulers, and two of those tribes were the Ahoms and the Gonds. Discussions on the Ahoms and the Gonds and how they came to power following the lead of the Rajput rulers are something that we will be taking up in our subsequent lessons. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app to learn one-to-one with our amazing teachers, or to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it's rewarding too. So register for free now.